Biden announces $425 million arms package for Ukraine. North Korea designates South Korea as hostile state. Good afternoon and Salam Malaysia Madani. You're watching World Today with me, SAHIH. Israel carried out dozens of strikes on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, killing a city mayor, toppling buildings and causing widespread destruction in several southern areas. The latest exchanges in the Israel-Hezbollah conflict came with Israel under increasing international pressure after UN peacekeepers in Lebanon were injured, as well as over the escalating humanitarian crisis in the besieged Gaza Strip. The Israeli military said its warplanes struck dozens of Hezbollah targets in the southern Lebanese city of Nabateh. At least 16 people were killed and 52 injured in the strikes on two municipal buildings. A local official said the city's mayor was among the dead, adding that the strikes form a kind of belt of fire. Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati condemned the attack, saying Israel deliberately targeted a meeting of the municipal council that was discussing the city's services and relief situation. The United Nations humanitarian coordinator for Lebanon, Imran Riza, said the devastating attack claimed the lives of yet more civilians and local authorities working to provide relief. Israel ramped up its bombardment in late September and by the end of the month sent ground troops across the Lebanese border. EU nations with peacekeepers in Lebanon Express the shared will to exert maximum political and diplomatic pressure on Israel to prevent further incidents against the UN mission. Italy and France organized a video conference among the 16 EU countries that participate in United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, where the defense ministers strongly condemned the attacks on the mission by Israel.
La Unión Europea nos hemos reunido para poner en valor toda la preocupación que tenemos en este momento por la situación de UNIFIL en Líbano. Hemos sido muy claros en decir que la misión de UNIFIL es esencial y fundamental que continúe para dar cumplimiento a la resolución de Naciones Unidas, que nadie más que las propias Naciones Unidas pueden tomar decisiones sobre esta misión y que por tanto permaneceremos unidos en Líbano defendiendo los valores de esta resolución. Del mismo modo,
the Italian Defense Ministry said one of the key points that emerged from the meeting was the shared will to exert maximum political and diplomatic pressure on Israel so that no further incidents occur. It added all the ministers expressed unanimous concern for the situation in the region, strongly condemning the attacks that hit UNIFIL bases, putting at risk the security of military personnel engaged in the United Nations mission. They expressed the need to review the rules of engagement to allow UNIFIL to operate more effectively and safely. The risk of cholera spreading in Lebanon is very high after a case of the acute and potentially deadly diarrheal infection was detected in the conflict-hit country. The World Health Organization highlighted the risk of cholera spreading among hundreds of thousands of people displaced since Israel escalated an air campaign against Hezbollah and launched a ground offensive in Lebanon.
And now what we are worrying actually is that displaced people for the current conflict actually have reached to the north. And if the cholera outbreak or the cholera spread to the new displaced people, it might spread very fast because some of those communities from the south and from the Beirut didn't have any cholera immunity for the last 10 years, and the risk of spread is very high.
Lebanon's health ministry said a cholera case had been confirmed in a Lebanese national who went to hospital on Monday suffering from watery diarrhea and dehydration. The UN Health Agency has for months been warning that the disease could resurface amid deteriorating water and sanitation among the displaced and their host communities. Lebanon suffered its first cholera outbreak in 30 years between 2022 and 2023, mainly in north of the country. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has unveiled his long-awaited victory plan to end Russia's invasion, rejecting any territorial concession and urging ramped-up Western backing, including an invitation to join NATO. Kiev is facing mounting pressure to find an exit strategy as its troops suffer battlefield losses and Moscow intensifies its strikes on infrastructure. Russia had seized around a fifth of Ukraine's territory since the invasion began, reducing towns and cities to rubble. But in his address to lawmakers in Kiev, Zelensky ruled out the possibility that Ukraine could cede some territories to secure peace and also dismiss any pause in the conflict. The Ukrainian leader said the number one priority in the five-part plan was closer integration with the US-led NATO defense alliance.
Пункт перший. Геополітичні. Пункти другий і третій – вони військові. Пункт четвертий – економічний. Пункт п'ятий – плану перемоги – безпековий. Пункти розраховані по часу дуже конкретно. Перші 4 – це час війни, щоб її завершити. П'ятий пункт – на час після війни, щоб гарантувати безпеку. Перший пункт – це запрошення в НАТО зараз.
Zelensky also said that his country's Western allies should lift restrictions on Ukraine's use of long-range weapons so Kiev can target Russian military sites on occupied Ukrainian territory and also within Russia. United States President Joe Biden has announced a $425 million arms package for Kiev in a call with President Volodymyr Zelensky. According to a readout of the call, the package includes air defense and armored vehicles. Biden also briefed Zelensky on his efforts to surge security assistance to Ukraine over the remainder of his term in office. Biden will also hold a virtual meeting of Ukraine's allies in November as he tries to shore up international support for Kiev before a possible return of Donald Trump to the White House in January next year. The White House said the $425 million US package includes additional air defense capability, air-to-ground munitions, armored vehicles, and critical munitions to meet Ukraine's urgent needs. It added the United States would, in coming months, provide hundreds of air defense missiles, artillery, hundreds of armored personnel carriers, and thousands of additional armored vehicles. The United States has provided around $175 billion in both military and economic assistance to Ukraine during the war, despite frequent opposition from Republicans. The European Union held its first summit with the Gulf states, part of EU diplomatic courting of less familiar friends as its 6 new economic allies. Its aim in meeting the 6 wealthy Arab states in the Gulf Cooperation Council was to deepen cooperation and recognize those countries' influence. In a joint statement at the end of the summit, the two sides said they would revive talks launched 35 years ago on a free trade agreement but suspended in 2008. They will also hold biennial summits, the next in Saudi Arabia in 2026.
Economic cooperation and trade relations are a centerpiece of our partnership. Here, there is a lot of untapped potential. There is a lot to do. The summit reconfirmed the need to reinforce our existing cooperation on trade and investment between the two regions. We agreed to move ahead with negotiations on a free trade agreement.
The EU partnership with the Gulf Cooperation Council will seek to boost collaboration in clean tech, critical minerals needed in the green transition, renewable energy, and hydrogen production. The EU is the second largest trading partner for Gulf Cooperation Council countries involving Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Indonesia's central bank has decided to maintain the interest rate at 6% after reducing it by 0.25 percentage points last month. At a 2-day meeting from Tuesday to Wednesday, the Board of Governors of Bank Indonesia also decided to keep the deposit rate unchanged at 5.25% and the lending rate at 6.75%. Governor of Bank Indonesia, Peri Warjio, said the decision is consistent with the monetary policy direction to ensure that inflation remains controlled within the target range of 1.5% to 3.5% for 2024 and 2025, while supporting sustainable economic growth. The central bank is focusing on short-term monetary policy and strengthening the stability of the rupiah exchange rate amid geopolitical conflicts that could lead to uncertainty in global financial markets. Perry also noted that a loose macroprudential policy remains in place to encourage bank lending to priority industries for growth and job creation while adhering to prudential principles. The Bank of Thailand's Monetary Policy Committee has voted to cut the policy rate for the first time since the year 2020, reducing it by 0.25 percentage point from 2.50% to 2.25% effective immediately in an effort to revive the economy. The committee voted 5-2 in favour of the rate cut, while 2 members opted to maintain the policy rate at 2.50%. The bank said the overall Thai economy is projected to expand as anticipated, and headline inflation is expected to gradually return to the target range by the end of this year. It noted that the deleveraging process is expected to continue, and the committee believes a neutral stance on the policy rate remains appropriate given the economic growth and inflation outlook. Most committee members supported the decision to cut the policy rate by 0.25 percentage points to ease the debt servicing burden for borrowers. Additionally, the lower policy rate is not expected to hinder the deleveraging process given the anticipated slowdown in loan growth. It remains neutral and consistent with the country's economic potential. A Vietnamese property tycoon sentenced to death for fraud totaling $27 billion faces a potential life sentence in a related trial on money laundering charges. Property developer Trong Mai Lan was found guilty in April of swindling cash from the Saigon Commercial Bank, which prosecutors said she controlled in one of the biggest corruption cases in history, and sentenced to death. Tens of thousands of people who had invested their savings in the bank lost money, shocking the communist nation and prompting rare protests from the victims. Prosecutors have now called for a life sentence for Lan on charges of money laundering, illegal cross-border trafficking of cash, and fraud. Another 33 accused, including her husband and niece, also faced verdicts and sentencings after a 4-week trial in Ho Chi Minh City. Around 36,000 people who bought bonds issued by Saigon Commercial Bank have been identified as victims of the fraud. Fuel tanker blast leaves at least 147 dead in Nigeria. That and more coming up next. North Korea has designated South Korea as a hostile state, confirming that its National Assembly had amended the country's constitution in line with their leaders' vow to drop unification as a national goal. The official Korean Central News Agency reported that the country blew up roads and railway linking it to South this week as an inevitable and legitimate measure taken in keeping the requirement of the country's constitution, which clearly defines South Korea as a hostile state. It said 60-meter-long sections of the road and railway on its side of the border that had been laid as crossings are now completely blocked as part of a phased complete separation of its territory from the South. North Korea recently amended its constitution, and this was the first such mention of the charter, formally declaring South Korea to be an enemy state. The deeply symbolic transport infrastructure linking the two countries has long been shuttered, but destroying it sends a clear message that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is not prepared to negotiate with the South. The United States, South Korea and Japan have announced the launch of a new multinational team to monitor the enforcement of sanctions against North Korea after Russia and China thwarted monitoring activities at the United Nations. The mechanism, named the Multilateral Sanctions Monitoring Team, was introduced after Russia in March rejected the annual renewal of a UN panel of experts that had over the past 15 years overseen the implementation of sanctions aimed at curbing North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. China abstained from the vote.
In light of the veto which disbanded the UN Security Council's 17-18 committee panel of experts this year, we hereby express our intention to establish the Multilateral Sanctions Monitoring Team, MSMT, a multilateral mechanism to monitor and report violations and evasions of the sanctions measures stipulated in the relevant UNSCRs.
The team is meant to continue the UN panel's work, including issuing regular reports on sanction enforcement, and will involve the participation of 8 other countries including Britain, France and Germany. Its launch was unveiled at a joint press conference in Seoul by US Deputy Secretary of State Kurt Campbell, South Korean Vice Foreign Minister Kim Hong-kyun and Japan's Vice Foreign Minister Masataka Okano, alongside ambassadors of the 8 countries. In another development, Japanese Vice Foreign Minister Masataka Okano held talks on Thursday with his South Korean counterpart Kim Hong-kyun in Seoul to strengthen bilateral ties amid tensions with North Korea. The meeting took place a day after the 2 senior diplomats met with their United States counterpart for talks and strongly condemned the North for intentionally raising tension by claiming the drone intrusion and sealing the southern border. The 3 officials also announced on Wednesday the launch of a new multinational team to monitor the enforcement of sanctions against North Korea. Earlier this month, Japan's new Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba vowed to continue strengthening ties with the like-minded nations, including pursuing deeper security cooperation with neighbouring South Korea, a policy advanced by his predecessor. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau accused India on Wednesday of violating his country's sovereignty as diplomatic tensions soar over the 2023 killing of a Sikh separatist in Vancouver. At a parliamentary inquiry on foreign interference, Trudeau addressed what he characterized as broad efforts by Indian representatives to silence critics of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government on Canadian soil. His comments echoed remarks he made earlier this week after both countries expelled each other's ambassador and 5 other top diplomats. Ottawa has linked Modi's government to the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, an advocate for an independent Sikh state who shot dead in June 2023 in the parking lot of a Sikh temple in Vancouver. Beyond the killing of Nijjar, Trudeau said national police had evidence that Canadians face intimidation, violence and other threats from those acting in concert with the Indian government. Trudeau further detailed conduct that he said involved Indian diplomats collecting information on Canadians who are opponents or in disagreement with the Modi government. Trudeau said India's intimidation tactics in Canada were not limited exclusively to the Sikh community. An explosion tore through crowds of people who had rushed to collect fuel spilling from a crashed tanker in northern Nigeria, killing at least 147 people. The tragedy is the latest such accident at a time when petrol has become a precious commodity in the country, which is suffering its worst economic crisis in a generation. The fuel tanker veered to avoid another vehicle and crashed in the town of Majia in Jigawa State. Following the crash, residents crowded round the overturned tanker to gather the leaking fuel. Local government chairman Hambali Zarga said the current death toll only accounted for bodies buried in one mass grave and warned the figure was likely to rise. He added dozens of victims were burned beyond recognition. He also said more bodies had been buried elsewhere, while around 140 injured residents were being treated in nearby hospitals. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu pledged to support those affected and said he was committed to the swift and comprehensive review of fuel transportation safety protocols across the country. Fuel tanker explosions are common in Africa's most populous nation, where roads can be poorly maintained. Since Tinubu scrapped subsidies last year, the price of petrol has soared 5-fold, and there are often shortages. Former One Direction singer Payne was found dead outside a hotel in Buenos Aires, Argentina, after the 31-year-old fell from his third-floor room balcony. The Capitol Police said they were called to the hotel in the capital's leafy Palermo neighborhood, where they were notified of an aggressive man who could be under the effects of drugs and alcohol. The hotel manager said he heard a loud noise at the back of the hotel, and when the police arrived, they found that a man had fallen over the balcony of his room. Emergency workers confirmed the death of the British singer, who was reportedly found in the hotel's interior patio. They said the singer suffered very serious injuries incompatible with life as a result of his fall, and there was no possibility of resuscitation. Boy band sensation One Direction emerged in 2010 when then teenagers Payne, Niall Horan, Harry Styles, Louis Tomlinson and Zayn Malik appeared on British television contest The X Factor. In 2016, the group announced it was going on an indefinite hiatus but not splitting up. Payne announced he was working on a solo album that same year, following in the footsteps of other band members. he had attended a concert by former bandmate Horan in Buenos Aires on 2nd October. Still to come in sports, Thomas Tuchel officially named as England head coach. Thomas Tuchel was named England's new manager on Wednesday, with the German set to start in the role from 1st January 2025. The 51-year-old, who has been out of work since leaving Bayern Munich at the end of last season, succeeds Englishman Gareth Southgate as permanent coach and becomes the third foreign manager of the Three Lions after Swan Goran Eriksson and Fabio Capello. A former coach of Chelsea, Borussia Dortmund, Paris Saint-Germain and Bayern Munich, Tuchel has the trophy-winning pedigree that the FA is seeking to help and a 58-year wait to win a major tournament. However, the move has drawn criticism over the FA's unwillingness to trust an Englishman with its top job. Tuchel won league title at PSG and Bayern and the German Cup with Dortmund, but his greatest success came during his time in English football at Chelsea. England, though, are still yet to win major men's tournaments since the 1966 World Cup on home soil. Nonetheless, Tuchel will inherit a richly talented generation of players, including Harry Kane, Jude Bellingham and Cole Palmer, that will be among the favourites for the 2026 World Cup. Manchester United's most successful manager, Alex Ferguson, will step down as a global ambassador after the club's part owners, Ineos, ended his multi-million-pound contract. Ferguson, a familiar sight in the Old Trafford director's box for years, signed an agreement with United in 2013 to be a club ambassador, receiving £2.16 million a year. According to a team source, the split was amicable and one of a number of time-consuming responsibility from which the 82-year-old Ferguson was stepping back, and that he was always welcome at Old Trafford. There have been job cuts virtually across the board at United as part of cost-saving measures at the club, which has been incurring losses for some time. Ferguson, who will step down from his ambassadorial duties at the end of the season, led United to 38 trophies, including 13 Premier League and 2 Champions League titles, before he retired from management in 2013. United are currently in 14th place after finishing a worst-ever 8th in the Premier League last season, despite spending just over £200 million on players in the close season. It is known whether the cost-cutting will affect other United ambassadors, including former players Andy Cole, Park Ji-sung, Dwight York, Dennis Irwin and Brian Robson. Kylian Mbappe trained with his Real Madrid teammates on Wednesday amid media reports of an ongoing rape investigation against the player by Swedish authorities. Mbappe's representatives have described the allegation as totally false and a slanderous rumor, while his lawyer said he was beyond reproach. Swedish prosecutors confirmed in a statement in response to the media coverage that a probe into an alleged rape at a hotel in central Stockholm had been opened, but they did not identify a suspect. Swedish public broadcaster SVT and Dailies Expressen and Aftonbladet, citing unnamed sources, reported that Mbappe, 25, was a suspect in the case. The France national team captain was on a private trip to the Nordic country's capital last week with a group of friends, having missed out on international duty against Belgium, the UEFA Nations League, due to injury. Real Madrid returned to action on Saturday when they travelled to Celta Vigo in La Liga, with Mbappe expected to start the match. In tennis, second seed Casper Ruud downed Italy's Lorenzo Sonego 6-3, 7-6 in his Stockholm Open debut on Wednesday to book a spot in the quarterfinals of the event. Ruud got off to a red-hot start, winning 80% of points behind his first serve in an opening set, which lasted just 39 minutes. The world number 8 then held off a season-set fight back from Sonego, edging a tiebreak to become the first Norwegian to register a win in the tournament's history. Ruud, ranked world number 8, will face Dutchman Taylan Gritsper, seeded 7th next. Gritsper had previously ended Briton Jacob Fernley's 13-match winning streak. The 23-year-old Scot, who's ranked 99, was looking to record the best win by ranking of his burgeoning professional career. Over in China, Daria Kasatkina came back from a set-down to win 1-6, 6-3, 6-2 over Czech Katerina Sinokova and reached the quarterfinals of the Ningbo Open on Wednesday. Neither woman put on a serving clinic during the match, which lasted just over 2 hours, with Kasatkina winning 56% of her service point to Siniakova's 52%. As such, both players had chances, but the fifth-seeded Russian proved more clinical, taking 6 of 14 break opportunities compared to Siniakova's 5 of 15. The win improves Kasatkina's record against Siniakova to 5 wins again, 1 loss. It was also her 36th match win over the season. Kasatkina, ranked world number 11, will face Kazakh Yulia Putintseva next in the quarterfinal. Putintseva moved in the quarterfinals by defeating German lucky loser Ella Recital at the Yunzu Tennis Center on Wednesday. Final item on sailing. Britain won its second race in their head-to-head America's Cup final against New Zealand on Wednesday, erasing the holders' lead to 4-2 in the first 2 7-point series in testing sea conditions of Barcelona. The British crew, skippered by Ben Ainslie, outmaneuvered the New Zealand crew, led by Peter Berling, in the final seconds of the pre-start and shot across the line to establish an early lead in the day's second race. Britain led around the first mark and were able to stay ahead in all of the 8 legs, hitting speeds of more than 35 knots as they navigated a churn-up sea, holding off a late New Zealand challenge for the win. Ainslie and his crew were also able to get the better of the New Zealand team, skippered by Peter Berling at the start of the first race as the Kiwis came off their foils while the British stayed up and foiling. Britain crossed the start line to leave New Zealand in their wake and disappeared up the course. By the time New Zealand were able to get back on their foils, Ainslie's crew just needed to make sure they sailed cleanly to capitalise on the advantage. Ainslie's crew kept their cool to notch up the first morale-boosting victory in a long quest to win the All Mark, which Britain have never won in the race's 173-year history.
Melaksanakan misi, mempertahan maruah, mencipta secara setiap pertemuan, takkan cinta dengan asalkan membuat peluang terus tegakkan satu perjuangan, satu suara akan yang direncana di dada dalam memburu takkan keraguan, kekuatan bicara.
That wraps up World Today this time around. In our top story, Joe Biden announces $425 million arms package for Ukraine. Till next time, I'm SAHIH Samsudin. Rasim Dani from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. Thank you for watching.